The story kicks off with a deceptively simple premise that quickly spirals into the kind of layered chaos the WNYX crew practically breathes. As Dave Nelson arrives at work determined to introduce what he calls a positive reinforcement initiative, a management strategy he believes will boost morale and productivity by encouraging everyone to recognize each other's contributions. But right from the start, you can feel this is doomed because the staff barely tolerates each other on a good day, let alone actively praises one another. And the tension between Dave's optimistic leadership style and the station's deeply ingrained cynicism becomes the central engine of the episode. Lisa initially supports Dave's idea, seeing it as a chance to create a more professional environment. But she quickly realizes that the problem isn't a lack of structure, but rather that everyone's personalities are fundamentally incompatible with forced positivity. Joe immediately mocks the initiative as emotional micromanagement, arguing that genuine appreciation cannot be scheduled or mandated. While Bill takes a more dramatic stance by claiming that praise is a manipulative tool used by institutions to control individual identity, which he delivers in a long, theatrical rant that somehow circles back to his own need for validation. Catherine treats the whole thing like a psychological experiment and begins offering exaggerated compliments on air, praising mundane actions with such intensity that listeners become confused about whether it's satire or sincerity, and Matthew, eager as always to please, throws himself into the initiative with almost painful enthusiasm, complimenting everyone non-stop to the point where it becomes uncomfortable rather than uplifting. As Dave pushes forward, he implements a system where each employee must publicly acknowledge another team member's contribution during the day, and this leads to a series of increasingly awkward interactions that reveal more resentment than appreciation. Because instead of heartfelt recognition, the compliments come out backhanded, sarcastic, or painfully forced. Like when Joe tells Bill that he admires his commitment to speaking confidently about things he clearly doesn't understand. Or when Lisa thanks Matthew for being consistently present, which sounds supportive but lands as faint praise at best. And through these exchanges, the episode cleverly exposes how difficult it is for people to express genuine respect when their relationships are built on sarcasm and competition. Meanwhile, Jimmy James becomes fascinated with the concept of positive reinforcement, but interprets it through his own bizarre philosophical lens, deciding that he wants to experience what it feels like to be an ordinary employee receiving praise rather than giving it as a billionaire owner. So he temporarily assigns himself menial tasks around the station and eagerly awaits compliments from the staff, who are both confused and slightly terrified by this role reversal, especially when Jimmy begins overperforming basic duties like delivering coffee or answering phones with an intensity that suggests he's trying to win an invisible award. And when the compliments he receives fail to meet his expectations, he spirals into a reflective monologue about the emptiness of external validation, which somehow both undermines and reinforces Dave's initiative at the same time. The subplot involving Catherine evolves into one of the episode's funniest threads as her exaggerated on-air compliments start gaining traction with listeners who interpret her tone as a bold new broadcasting style, leading the station to receive unexpected praise for what they think is innovative programming. And this creates a meta layer where fake appreciation generates real success, forcing Dave to confront the uncomfortable possibility that authenticity might not actually matter in the way he assumed. While Lisa grows increasingly frustrated trying to maintain some level of professionalism amid the escalating absurdity, eventually snapping and delivering a brutally honest critique of everyone's behavior that momentarily silences the room because it cuts through the forced positivity and addresses the underlying issues directly. Matthew's journey throughout the episode adds an emotional core as his relentless need to be liked drives him to overextend himself, offering help where it isn't needed and agreeing with everyone regardless of his own opinions, until he reaches a breaking point and admits that all the compliments in the world don't make him feel secure if he doesn't believe them. A moment that resonates more deeply than Dave's structured initiative ever could because it highlights the difference between external validation and internal confidence, and even Bill, who spends most of the episode dismissing the entire concept, has a brief moment of vulnerability where he admits that he does, in fact, care about what others think of him despite his elaborate defenses against that reality. As the episode builds toward its climax, Dave attempts to salvage the initiative by organizing a final group exercise where everyone must give one sincere, specific compliment to another person, no sarcasm allowed, and for a brief moment it seems like it might work as the characters hesitate, struggle, and then begin to express genuine appreciation in small but meaningful ways. Joe acknowledges Dave's persistence even when it annoys him. Lisa admits that Catherine's unpredictability brings energy to the station. Bill thanks Matthew for listening to his ramblings without judgment. And Matthew, in turn, expresses gratitude to the entire team for giving him a place where he feels he belongs. But just as the scene starts to feel almost sentimental, Jimmy interrupts with an over-the-top declaration about the futility of structured emotion, effectively derailing the moment and returning the group to their usual chaotic dynamic, which feels both frustrating and perfectly in character. By the end of the episode, Dave concedes that while his initiative may have failed in its original form, it did reveal something important about the team, namely that their connections are real even if they are rarely expressed in conventional ways. And instead of forcing a system onto them, he decides to let those dynamics exist naturally, accepting that WNYX will never be a traditionally harmonious workplace, but recognizing that its dysfunction is also its strength. And the final scenes reinforce this idea as the staff drifts back into their patterns of banter, conflict, and reluctant camaraderie, with small, almost imperceptible changes in how they interact, suggesting that the experience has had some impact even if it doesn't look like success on the surface. And in true NewsRadio fashion, the episode closes on a comedic note that undercuts its own sincerity while still allowing the emotional undercurrent to linger, capturing the essence of the show's ability to balance sharp humor with genuine insight into human relationships, ultimately delivering a story that is as much about the difficulty of expressing appreciation as it is about the need for it, all wrapped in the fast-paced, character-driven chaos that defines the series and keeps its world feeling both exaggerated and oddly relatable at the same time. And as the aftermath of that half-sincere, half-derailed group moment ripples through the station, the episode leans even harder into the idea that change at WNYX never arrives in clean, cinematic breakthroughs, but instead sneaks in through subtle shifts in behavior that the characters themselves barely acknowledge. Because almost immediately after Jimmy's interruption, everyone instinctively retreats back into their usual defenses. Joe cracks a joke to defuse the awkwardness. Bill loudly reasserts his indifference to emotional vulnerability. Lisa straightens her posture and tries to regain control of the room. And Dave awkwardly pretends the exercise went exactly as planned even though he knows it didn't. Yet beneath that surface-level reset, something has clearly moved, especially in the smaller interactions that follow. Like when Joe quietly fixes a piece of equipment before Dave even notices it's broken, not announcing it or turning it into a sarcastic bit. Or when Lisa gives Matthew a more direct instruction, but softens her tone just enough to show a hint of respect rather than pure authority. Or when Catherine, on air again, continues her exaggerated compliment style but slips in one line that feels genuinely heartfelt. Almost like she's testing whether sincerity can exist within her usual performance without completely breaking it. Dave, still trying to process what success even means in this context, has a private conversation with Jimmy where he admits that he might have approached the entire initiative from the wrong angle, expecting immediate, visible results instead of understanding that this group operates on its own strange emotional timeline. And Jimmy, in one of his rare moments of clarity that cut through his usual eccentricity, tells Dave that people don't change because they're told to, but because they accidentally realize something about themselves. A statement that sounds absurd at first, but actually reframes the entire episode because that's exactly what has been happening in small, almost invisible ways throughout the day. Meanwhile, Bill, who has spent most of the episode loudly rejecting the need for validation, finds himself alone for a brief moment and almost begrudgingly admits out loud that Matthew's earlier comment about listening without judgment meant something to him, though he quickly rephrases it in more grandiose terms to protect his ego. And when Matthew overhears just enough to understand the sentiment without catching the defensive spin, it creates a quiet, unspoken connection between them that feels more meaningful than any forced compliment Dave could have orchestrated. Lisa's arc continues to evolve as she reflects on her own reaction to the initiative, realizing that her frustration came not just from the inefficiency of the system, but from her own discomfort with vulnerability, because being competent and in control has always been her way of earning respect. And the idea of openly expressing appreciation feels like stepping into uncertain territory. So when she later thanks Dave in a more straightforward, less performative way for trying to improve the workplace, it lands as one of the episode's most genuine moments precisely because it's understated and slightly awkward. Joe, on the other hand, processes everything through action rather than words, and while he never openly embraces the idea of positive reinforcement, his behavior subtly shifts in ways that suggest he has absorbed something from the experience. Like when he chooses not to escalate a minor argument with Bill into a full-blown confrontation, instead letting it drop with a muttered comment that almost sounds like reluctant respect, which for Joe is basically the emotional equivalent of a standing ovation. Catherine continues to blur the line between sincerity and performance, leaning into her on-air persona while occasionally letting glimpses of her real feelings slip through, creating a layered dynamic where even she might not fully know which parts are genuine and which are exaggerated. And that ambiguity becomes part of the episode's broader theme about how people express themselves in environments where authenticity is both risky and necessary. As the day winds down, Dave gathers everyone one last time, not for another structured exercise, but simply to acknowledge that the initiative didn't go the way he expected. And instead of apologizing or doubling down, he takes a more honest approach, admitting that he doesn't have all the answers and that maybe the goal shouldn't be to fix how they interact, but to understand it better. And while this speech is met with the usual mix of skepticism and sarcasm, there's also a noticeable lack of outright resistance, as if the team is willing to accept this version of Dave's leadership because it feels more real and less imposed. Jimmy, ever the wild card, concludes his own journey by declaring the experiment a philosophical success regardless of its practical outcome, because it provided him with new insights into human behavior that he will likely misinterpret in future endeavors. And he rewards the staff with an arbitrary but generous bonus that has nothing to do with performance and everything to do with his personal sense of satisfaction, which both undermines and reinforces the episode's message about the unpredictable nature of reward and recognition. The final sequence of the episode brings everything full circle as the station returns to its normal rhythm, phones ringing, broadcasts continuing, arguments sparking and dissolving, but now with a slightly altered tone that suggests the characters are carrying forward the small realizations they've gained, even if they would never openly admit it. And Dave, watching this controlled chaos unfold, allows himself a moment of quiet acceptance, realizing that leadership in this environment isn't about imposing change, but about guiding it when it happens naturally. And that sometimes the most meaningful progress is the kind that doesn't announce itself. And as the camera metaphorically pulls back from WNYX, the episode leaves you with the sense that nothing has changed and yet everything has shifted just enough to matter, capturing that uniquely NewsRadio balance between absurd comedy and subtle emotional truth. where growth isn't measured in dramatic transformations, but in the tiny adjustments people make as they continue to navigate their messy, interconnected lives within the unpredictable ecosystem of the newsroom.